watching the Gita News Network.
Good afternoon and welcome to Secrets of the Path on the Gita News Network. I'm Vishnu Das. Thank you for joining us. Today's top story, balance. How to stay balanced in yoga. We'll take a look at this equilibrium in relation to Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, the Yoga of Knowledge. On the journey of Gita, Chapter 4 is a pivotal step and introduces key concepts that may initially seem complicated. I remember the first time I read the Gita. Everything felt pretty smooth as I finished Chapter 3. Then when I got to the Sanskrit names at the beginning of Chapter 4, I got lost. It was like entering some kind of mystic world. I revealed this imperishable yoga first to Vivaswan. He taught it to Manu, and Manu imparted it to Ikshvaku. On today's episode, we'll simplify the meanings of those names as we dive into Chapter 4 and yogic balance with the help of some special guests. In this chapter, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna to stand up and fight. Certainly, you can't stand up without having physical balance, but is that the yogic balance we're talking about here? No. Instead, the clue comes at the beginning of this chapter in the 7th verse.
Jada jada hi dharmasya glanirvavati bharatam abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srujamyaham.
Why does a wheel get derailed? Because it's out of balance. In this verse, Lord Krishna is describing the situation on a universal scale, and it corresponds to the balance that each yogi must strive to restore on the individual level. What is that balance? As Swami Sri Atmananda explains, it's the balance between experience and awareness. Basically, experience pertains to matter, while awareness relates to spirit. As Swamiji explains, the yogi first needs to build a strong foundation of awareness, and then on top of that can come the structure of experience. Without a foundation, any type of structure would be unstable. In the case of a yogi on the Gita path, an overload of experience without a base of awareness leads to a downfall in consciousness or prevents yogic ascension in the first place. Speaking of strong foundations, we now go live to the headquarters of the Hanuman Construction Company, where project manager Mike Millett is standing by. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Vishnu Das! Thanks for having me, buddy.
Mike, what role does balance play in a construction project?
Funny you should ask. I was just reaching for the level. Now, does everyone know what this tool is for? It's got a little air bubble here. Shows you when things are perfectly in balance. It's just like the yoga of Bhagavad Gita, where we're trying to have a balance between experience and awareness. And if either one of those is too much or too little, your structure is going to be out of alignment. Your floor is going to be sloping, the windows won't open or close, the door will get jammed.
And as you mentioned earlier, a building can become so unbalanced it might even fall down. Yogis, take note. Mike, what then would you say is the most important part of a structure?
Great question, Vishnu Das. I'd like to show you that, but the most important aspect cannot be seen with your eyes. In the case of a building, that most important piece, that most important aspect is the foundation, below ground, not visible, but that holds a structure. In the case of a yogi or a yogic consciousness, it's within. That foundation is within.
So, when a yogi is able to maintain her state in a challenging situation, the credit goes to the yogi's solid inner foundation. Even though it's not visible, that's her source of strength. Mike, you mentioned that you do have a structural foundation to show us?
We're building a school nearby, and I took some footage of the foundation that we're digging right now. You can see all those holes we've dug, and in those holes we're going to pour literally tons of concrete to form the foundation, and you see in there all those metal bars. Those are called reinforcement bars or rebar. Those are steel bars. They act like bones in the concrete to make it stronger.
Interesting. In the same way, the yogi's attainments, like sense control and equanimity, strengthen the yogic foundation. Mike, I'm guessing that you're wearing protective equipment because construction can be dangerous. Is there any parallel to that on the yoga path?
Lord Krishna talks about jnana in the end of chapter 4 as a sword, the sword of knowledge. And I don't have a sword handy, but here's my saw of knowledge. The thing is about the sword of knowledge, it's a double-edged sword. The sword of knowledge cuts on both sides.
So, although the sword is for attacking the enemies, the yogi might actually wound himself instead.
That's right. As much as that sword of knowledge, with its sharp edge, can defend you against your enemies in consciousness, there's also at the same time the back edge of the blade is facing you. Means it can cut you.
Can you share any examples of that?
Sharing this knowledge before you've assimilated it yourself. When this knowledge enters the system, one has this urge to share and spread the knowledge. And this is not a bad thing, it's a noble thing. It's with the intent of helping others, but sometimes one does not see the trap of the ego that's involved there, wanting to be seen as knowledgeable or as a teacher and have that status.
Yes. Anything more to share?
Swami Sri Atmananda gives the example of a balloon. When you're blowing up a balloon, if you keep letting the air out, it will never get full. So in the same way, the yogi is blowing up this balloon of consciousness, but by spreading the knowledge, trying to teach others prematurely, that's letting air out of the balloon at the same time you're trying to fill it. The balloon will never become full.
Thank you, Mike, for these constructive insights. For more on this concept, we now go live to Mr. Soul. Welcome, sir.
I was just thinking of this yesterday while riding the bus. I'm sitting on the bus, and from nowhere, the vision of a level came to me. Somehow, for some reason, as I was on that bus, the idea of keeping things perfectly in balance, keeping things level, not too tilted to one side or the other, it came to my vision.
Interesting.
In fact, on that bus, there was a group of Americans, and they recognized me from one of your previous episodes. And one of the women in that group, she asked me a question. She told me she's a very sincere seeker on the path of Gita, but she's a very busy lady. And she told me 18 chapters in Gita. She's so busy. Could I help her just narrow it down to one? Could I tell her one chapter? And I considered our conversation. I told her chapter 4. She said, okay, and she looked at it and she said, but Mr. Soul, that chapter contains 42 verses. I'm very busy. Could you help me? Could you narrow it down to just one verse? I considered this and I told her, verse 199. Well, she looked at that and she said, Mr. Soul, can you further narrow it down to just one word? I said, fire.
Why this verse? And why the word fire?
That's a great question, Visudas. But first, one for you. Do you know what is knowledge?
Yes, I believe so. May I invite your explanation?
Certainly. But let's first look at what knowledge is not. Knowledge is not sitting in the classroom, reading a textbook, listening to the teacher, what we think of as the conventional educational process. This accumulation of mental facts and figures is really information, not knowledge, okay? Now, how do you acquire that information? You read the textbook. You listen to the teacher. You perceive this all through your senses. Therefore, this information is a type of experience. Whereas the knowledge of Gita is an awareness. It's beyond experience. We cannot gain it through the experiential plane. We have to go higher, beyond experience, to get knowledge, to have this awareness descend to us.
Will you explain why you picked the word fire?
Most definitely. There are 3 reasons for that, okay? Reason number 1, look at the context of that verse. Yatedam si samidognir basmasat kurterjana, yanagdi sarva karmani basmasat kurtetata. This fire of knowledge will burn all types of karma, right? So we have the power of fire, the fire power. Think about burn all types of karma as a blazing fire turns wood to ashes. Now envision a big log of wood, right? It's heavy, it's solid, it's dense. You can't even pick it up or move it. And yet the power of this fire will transform it into ashes that you could just blow away.
So the transformative power of fire. What else?
Number 2, fire's other powers. Not just burning, but fire gives us light and warmth. And so, symbolically, fire will help us see the path. It will illuminate the steps we need to take, help us see the obstacles that need to be avoided. And while it may be cold on the ocean of experience, this fire of knowledge will keep us warm.
Beautiful interpretation, sir.
Number 3, and most important, fire symbolizes yajna, or offering.
Swami Sri Atmananda's translation defines yajna as the integration of invocation, worship, and offering to divine power.
In chapter 4, many types of yajnas are described, and perhaps for a lot of viewers, the one that may come to mind is the Vedic yajna.
Like those that are performed at the Universal Veda Gurukulam.
That's one type of yajna, but there are many described in chapter 4. And perhaps most simply, if we just can think of it as offering, because the language can get complicated. It's not a complicated concept. Think of yajna as an offering. And I'll give you an example from my own life. Inspired by Swami Sri Atmananda, for, 15 years, maybe 20 years now, every time I sit down to a meal, before I touch the food, I touch the plate, and I invoke the Lord of my heart. And then I offer that food, and I say, O Lord, by your love, to thee and to Divine Mother are offered this food and this nourishment, this action and its fruit. May thy will be done, O Lord. Be it as thou wilt. Takes 20 or 30 seconds. That is an offering. That type of consciousness, this yajna consciousness, make everything an offering. Everything you do, everything you receive, everything you give, everything you have. That, put simply, is the essence of yajna.
Thank you so much, Mr. Soul. We'll be back with you again later in this episode. Before we pause for a commercial break, I'd like to highlight one point that Mr. Soul shared with me earlier today. He explained that, although in the early stages this yajna consciousness requires effort, it finally does become a natural process, And this point was further emphasized to me when I went to write my daily verse for Swadhyaya, or contemplation. And today that verse is verse 185. Now, this verse speaks of performing work in a spirit of yajna. Notice it doesn't say in a task of yajna or an assignment of yajna, an effort of yajna. It says in a spirit of yajna. And so when we do something with a certain spirit, it means that spirit is within us. It's become integrated. It's a natural process. We'll be back with the sports report after this. Yoga is the art of getting things done without attachment, says the Bhagavad Gita. Tune in Thursdays at 8 to hear yogic perspectives from top artists.
Social scientists have demonstrated that critical thinking is closely linked to creativity. And the yogi has to use both in assessing a scene and determining how to respond as a yogi. And Swami Sri Atmananda has often emphasized that discrimination is not a process of deciding between one experience and another experience. It's not deciding between an apple and an orange. That's not discrimination. That's comparison. The discrimination is between experience and awareness. Or for this example, between having a piece of fruit or not having a piece of fruit. It's not about depriving oneself of the experience. It's asking, will this experience take me toward the goal or will it not? Will it take me away from the goal? And based on that discrimination, the yogi determines the course of action.
We're back with the sports report. Today's first yogic athlete is everyone's favorite bicycle mechanic, Winston Wheels. Winston, let's ride.
Last time we talked about how riding a bicycle has certain similarities with getting started on the Gita path, when the yogi needs to learn to maintain balance in order to be able to apply discrimination across a wide range of circumstances.
So here you're showing us what happens when you stop at a red light and you are actually able to remain balanced the whole time without putting your foot down. That is certainly an impressive display of stability. So tell us, how does this relate to the yoga process?
The analogy here is that in yoga, yes, the yogi may be pulled into this material situation, but it doesn't mean yoga stops. It doesn't even mean yoga pauses. It just means the yogi has to take extra care to maintain balance, because the momentum may not be happening, but maintain the balance. And then when the distraction or the interruption is finished, onward, the yogi keeps rolling forward.
How about an example?
You're having a very contemplative day and you're studying your Svadhyaya, or your daily verse for contemplation. You're studying the Gita, and some external circumstance, some outside factor, be it something at work, a family matter, something causes you to just be totally engrossed, submerged in the material world, and you're not thinking consciously of Gita. Now, at a certain point, the yogic consciousness has become so ingrained that it's fully integrated, and you don't have to think of it because it guides your actions. But until that point, the yogi needs to have this skill for maintaining the balance. And that balance is really being anchored in knowledge. Lord Krishna says it in verse 200 of Gita. Nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitram iha vidite. Nothing more powerful to purify the consciousness than knowledge.
Next up on the sports report is our senior correspondent, Yogi. Om Namo Bhagavate. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Thank you, Vishnudas. What do you have for us today, Yogi? This is called a balance board. Very simple piece of equipment. It's just a flat board, and a roller. And that black roller is essentially just a very hard tube that you can roll the board back and forth on. And the objective is simply to maintain your balance. I'm guessing that's harder than it looks. That's right, it's pretty tricky. There are people that perform tricks and all sorts of maneuvers. Personally, I keep it pretty simple. I just try to maintain my balance for as long as I can while moving. So, how does this relate to yoga? For me, the correlation with yoga is that, well, equanimity literally means balance. It means equilibrium. And so when I'm on the balance board, I'm thinking about how my body needs to stay centered. Don't go too far out to the right or the left. Always come back to center. Just like the yogi needs to be focused, remain focused. Like Krishna says, constantly contemplate. So, does a specific verse of Gita come to mind? Well, we're in chapter 4, so certainly verse 184, balanced in success and failure. What happens when you don't stay centered? You fall off. You might hit the ground, you might catch yourself, but you've lost your balance. And so I know when that happens to me on the yoga path, when I am not staying centered and I get pulled to one side or another by experience, and either I'm perhaps chasing an indulgence or I'm identified with something I heard or saw, I get upset. Any of those types of overemphasis of experience at the expense of awareness pulls me off balance, and then I lose my state. And it takes time to get it back. Is that disappointing? No, it's a building experience, a growing experience. It's an opportunity for introspection and analysis. For me, I use those types of situations to examine what was a shortfall, what pulled me off balance, was my sense control weak, and how do I go beyond that? How do I try not to let that happen in the future? Or if it does, how do I reduce the intensity so I'm gradually able to maintain the balance more and more, maintain balance longer? Thank you for that experiential sharing, Yogi. For me, the verse that came to mind regarding the balance board was verse 198, the boat of knowledge. The boat moves up and down on the water as the waves rise and fall, and the boat never tips over because it stays balanced. In the same way, the boat of knowledge enables the Gita yogi to stay balanced in the ocean of material distraction. And now, for a deeper look at Chapter 4, we go live to Mr. Soul. Will you please explain the opening verse of this chapter?
It's very simple. Don't let it seem confusing. This whole verse, this whole chapter, is talking about a process of descent, something from above descending to below. It's like the sun. Right now the sun is setting, and as we look at it, it's moving lower and lower in the sky, slowly coming down to earth. That's the concept here. And so in verse 163, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, I revealed this imperishable yoga first to Vivaswan. Well, Vivaswan is sun, the god of light.
What's the significance of that?
As Swami Sri Atmananda has explained, sun or Vivaswan represents the psychic component of the human system. So what Lord Krishna is saying is that when this knowledge descends, it first comes to the psychic. From there, Lord Krishna goes on, Vivaswan taught it to Manu. Manu represents the mind. So from the psychic, it percolates down to the mind.
And from the mind...
Next, Manu imparted it to Ikshvaku. Ikshvaku represents the vital component of the human system. So this knowledge descends from above, and percolates through the psychic, through the mind, to the vital. So it's filling these layers of the human system.
Thank you for this clarification, Mr. Soul. I'd like to ask about a few other terms that Swamiji has mentioned. Does this descent relate in any way to the incarnation or avatar?
They're the same thing. That's what I'm saying. It's very simple. Avatar, incarnation, descent. These all refer to the same process.
And as Swamiji has explained, this supreme force descends in two ways. It can descend to the universal plane, for example, during times of chaos, confusion, and devastation when Mother Earth is calling and praying for the avatar. It can also descend to individuals in response to each person's aspiration. In some cases, the individual may just be getting awakened to spirit and may not even be putting effort, yet this force is thrust upon them. Is that an accurate summary, Mr. Soul?
Precisely.
Since we're in chapter 4, shall we talk about the Guru?
We need to make one distinction here. On the traditional path, the Guru is the master or guide or teacher that liberates or releases the devotee from the clutches of Prakriti, or the trap, the bondage of this material plane in which we live.
And that's different from the Guru of Gita?
On the Gita path, this incarnation force, this avatar force, descends to a form.
And the duties of that person
are listed in verse 170. Parichanaya sadhunam vinashaya chadushkritam dharmasam stapanartaya sambhavam yuge yuge, for the protection of the virtuous, to destroy evil, and to reestablish dharma. And what did Lord Krishna say? I come again and again. Means time after time, this force descends to all these Guru forms for this purpose.
And to be clear, the Guru of Gita may play any role in any walk of life and may not necessarily appear in the conventional function of a guru with disciples. For example, Lord Krishna was playing the role of a chariot driver. Tell us more, Mr. Soul.
The Guru is a source of light. Verse 196, Tadvidi pranipatena priprashnena sevya upadikshanti te gyanam gyaninas tatvadarshina. Know this knowledge from the enlightened masters. They are the knowers of truth. Notice, this emphasis on the Guru comes in chapter 4. By this stage, the yogi has already gone through the process of dejection, has already begun practicing discrimination, sense control, striving toward equanimity of chapter 2, is trying to perform action in the spirit of yajna, karma yoga of chapter 3, and trying to be non-identified with the doership, the result of the process.
Right, those are prerequisites. For someone interested in beginning on the yoga path today, there are so many online courses and websites and fancy retreats and yoga magazines. So these days, just how important is the Guru?
One cannot travel on this path without the light of the Guru. And that word is not to be used lightly. There are masters, there are teachers, there are guides, and then there is the Guru.
Thank you for raising that point, Mr. Soul. The term Guru has been misused and abused, and here in the West, many people may have seen it misapplied or may not grasp its significance. Anything to add?
One cannot overstate the importance of the Guru. The first analogy that comes to mind is the wheels on the car, right? Without the wheels, the car is not going anywhere. But that the Guru is so much, infinitely more important than that. In that example, the Guru is not only the wheels, the Guru is the car, The Guru is a driver. The Guru is the road. The Guru is the destination.
Thank you, Mr. Soul. Your reverence for your Guru is deeply felt. I feel the same way. And thank you for joining us. Today, we looked at the importance of balance in yoga and discussed key concepts from Chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, including avatar, incarnation, and Guru. Join us next time as we continue this journey here on the Gita News Network. Jai Shri Gurudev.